Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith.
I'm Spencer Ziegler, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. And where are we today, Mellisa?
We're at NCTIES, downtown Raleigh.
Yes, we're excited. We're presenting at a conference. The room, can y'all say hello? Hello! Yeah, okay. That's proof. They don't think that we're making this up. So yeah, we're talking to people about data literacy and podcasting for this. And really, so we're wrapping up our fourth season of this podcast. Mm-hmm. I didn't really think that we would get here, but here we are. And throughout this seasons, we've talked a lot about data literacy. So Mellisa, before we hear from the room, I'm curious, how has your understanding of data literacy evolved over the years?
So I have to say, for me, my understanding of data literacy has definitely deepened, and I definitely see the need for more data literacy. I think when we first started this, I had said that as a classroom teacher, my data literacy, I didn't have a class on data literacy. So my understanding of data literacy really came about from my years being in the classroom and now in my role in Wake County Public Schools. And so over the years and through this podcast, hearing from our different interviewees, even, just having to do some of the research, it has definitely deepened in my understanding of what data is out there, the kinds of analysis that is needed. And then to me, the key part for me that I want to take away is folks' understanding of data. I think we use the word data like we use the word read and just think it's an automatic thing that a person can read or a person can analyze and make sense of data. And I don't think that's always necessarily true. And so my understanding has changed in that I see a need in that we need to really broaden folks' understanding of what is data and making sure they understand data so that they can do all of the things they need to do with data.
Yeah, so deepened and broadened kind of stands out. And I think that fits with me too. Mine has definitely broadened over the years. One thing is I love doing this podcast because we have different topics. We dive into the research.
Right.
And then we come out and we share all these kind of really complex findings. But I felt like every single episode ended with, ultimately, it comes down to relationships.
Correct.
So something that's, so the way in which my perception of data literacy has broadened has been thinking about what data can inform those relationships. Whereas I think previously my perception of data literacy was about student test scores and quantitative data. But yeah, over the years, I'm thinking a lot more about perception data. And, quick plug for our Wake County listeners, when this episode airs, the student survey has launched. So please, have your kids fill that out. So the value of perception data and also thinking about qualitative data to complement quantitative data. I think before this podcast, those two areas I probably didn't give enough credence when I'm thinking about data literacy. Yeah,
I would agree with that too. I think doing the work on this podcast has helped me to see that you need to understand that data because the numbers are just the numbers. So when you get a grade or a score on a test, those are just numbers. But you need those other pieces to kind of make sense of what those numbers mean and then what to do differently with those numbers. So yes, I agree with that.
So now at this point, our listeners have had almost 60 episodes of us talking, which, I think we're wonderful, but they might want to hear some different voices. And we have a wonderful opportunity before us. We got a room full of
educators.
Yeah, from across the state. So we really want to hear from them about how they're thinking about data literacy. So the first prompt for them is, what does data literacy mean to you? So let's hear some responses for that.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm a first-year assistant principal in New Hanover County Schools at Freeman Elementary. For me, data literacy means understanding my school's data well enough to know if we are growing and becoming more proficient. It also means understanding the financial data of the school to make sure we are spending wisely, allotting funds wisely, and being creative with our funds to make the most out of educator and support positions. You spoke about perception data earlier. Our teachers are completing the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey, and I'm tracking our school, district, and state's participation rates. And I'm anxious and excited to see the results and work with those results in the coming school year.
I'm Mindy. I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Edenton-Chowan Public Schools. And for me, data literacy is about being able to analyze the data you have in a way that allows you to then determine next steps needed to affect change in practice or process to improve outcomes, regardless of the level of success you're having. So for example, when you analyze data, know better, do better, right? So if data is bad or mediocre, we need to change or adjust. And also don't settle. If data is good, how can we increase it with small tweaks in process and practice? Because ultimately, data is about doing what's best for students.
Okay, so my name is Lauren. I'm a digital teaching and learning coach for Iredell Statesville Schools. And I think of it as a way to look at data and understand it in a meaningful way so that we can use it to make changes and also see and celebrate success.
My name is Carrie. I am a digital learning coach at Anderson School District 1 in South Carolina. And to me, data literacy is the difference between what we think or feel and what we know. So we all have that teacher instinct for understanding our students and what they've learned or where they are, but being data literate means being able to support that instinct with facts.
All right, thank you so much for those participants, for those reflections. Now we're back in the studio. So Mellisa, what stood out to you as you heard those reflections?
So there was one reflection from Kelly, who was, I think, an AP at an elementary school, where she talked about understanding the financial data of a school to kind of know how to use their funds. And I thought that was really insightful, because when I think of data literacy or any of the terms around that, and even though we talk about the measures, we kind of talk about the student outcomes or perception data. Financial data is like that gave me pause. And I said, that's a new aspect that extends the thinking of what encompasses data for data literacy beyond the classroom. But of course, understanding the financial data is equally as important, because it could have impacts in the classroom data. So I thought that was really interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, same. Like I feel like a recurring theme in our podcast is that everything is data,
Yes.
But probably one of my blind spots for having always been kind of classroom teacher in this is that I don't really think about the finances too much. There's other people that take care of that.
Right.
And thankfully, for some of the educators, that's part of their data literacy, so that people like me can just focus on the stuff that we focus on. So that was refreshing to hear that. Yeah.
And then my other one was from a DLC from South Carolina, who talked about knowing how to support your instincts with facts.
Yeah.
And I thought that really resonated with me, because we constantly talk about the intertwining of your quantitative data with your qualitative data. And so again, it's not a neither,
Right.
but a both and. And so how do you use that to sort of triangulate what you're seeing, right? You might have quantitative and you need to back that up with qualitative. Similarly, you might start off with qualitative and need to back that up with quantitative. So I liked, that's what resonated for me from that response.
Yeah, I liked that, and how you summarize it in that, because there are biases sometimes with some of our gut feelings, but that's not a rejection of it. It's then how can we collect some of that qualitative data, or street data might be another way to think of it, so that we can have a better sense of what to do moving forward.
Yeah. So what about you? What stood out for you from those initial responses?
Yeah, a pair of things as I reflect back. Mindy, I really liked how she put it, so the analyze the data that you have so you can determine next steps. And I like thinking of it in terms of just input and output. Input of the data, so that those practices are kind of like the output. After which you probably analyze that, and it becomes this virtuous cycle. Because going back to that point that everything is data, we are using some sort of data to determine our practices. The question is whether it's valid and reliable data in terms of what we're actually hoping to achieve.
Yeah, and I think it lends itself nicely to that. A lot of the models that we see about data analysis is that sort of circular thing, right?
Yep.
You start with something, you collect, you analyze, you see where they reach it. If not, you move on to something else, start a circle, or if not, you continue on that circle. So yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. And then Lauren, a digital teaching learning coach, talked about see and celebrate success. And I love that, thinking of data there too. Because one of the things I feel like we hear sometimes is that data creates a certain amount of apprehension and anxiety.
And angst, yeah.
And are you familiar with the phrase that the magic ratio?
No.
They talk about with relationships sometimes. Sometimes you're 3-to-1 or 5-to-1, but that ratio of positive to negative comments in order for a relationship to thrive. And I think that probably applies to data too.
Yeah.
Like we want this, 3-to-1 or even 5-to-1 ratio of data being empowering, versus there are times in which data can be a little bit distressing.
Yes.
But we can't if it becomes disproportionate, then we're not going to use data appropriately because it'll be thought of as a hindrance, a weapon, and not something that can help us.
Definitely. I like that one.
Yeah. Okay, so then we also threw a second prompt out there for the participants at NCTIES, and that was, in terms of data literacy, what will you focus on moving forward? So let's hear those responses.
So I'm Leaf, assistant principal in Lincoln County Schools, and I think as far as improving my own data literacy, I think making sure I understand the sources of where my data is coming from, triangulating it if as needed, because these are humans, not a machine. So sometimes you really need to look to see all the factors, look for biases, and then always talk through the results with others and trying to find people that can help me see with a different viewpoint, or those people that maybe can argue against what I might be thinking, so that I can really make sure I'm, seeing a whole picture before I start to make instructional decisions.
My name is Dr. Travis Town. I am a social studies teacher at the Lenore Early College in Lenore County. I think one of the struggles that most of us have is actually easily identifying the data, that it's so much. And so how do we identify what is going to be the crucial aspect to us? And then also making assumptions that are going to be worthwhile. A lot of the data that is out there, it's great in facts, but how do we make assumptions that are going to drive us forward to enhance our teaching? So that's the struggle that I want to get better at.
Okay, back in the studio again. Loved hearing those responses. Mellisa, what stands out to you as you listen to those?
So yeah, for me, I like the one by Dr. Travis, and he talked about making assumptions that are worthwhile. And what I liked about that is, as a classroom teacher or as an educator looking at data, you're always worried about, is this the right conclusion or assumption that I have just made? Because you're going to use that to make a decision or to inform a decision. So always wondering or thinking about, is this the right assumption? And again, it's conclusive, but not that it can't change, right?
Yeah.
So being open enough that it's an assumption, it's a conclusion. How do you check those assumptions? And then sort of moving on. So having a space where it's concrete, but not so concrete that it can't change.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, that we have those assumptions and how can we validate them? So using data for that. I think that's a great thing for him to focus on moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah, and I really liked Leaf, who is an assistant principal, talked about, there's this phrase that stood out in her response, that humans, not machine.
Yeah.
And I love that as a touch point when we're working with data, because there is perhaps a push to take it in perhaps a cold and calculating area, to remember to return to the idea that these are humans, not machines. They are more than a data point. And that made me think of the value in qualitative data, or the value in street data, like we've talked about in a previous series, as a way to always kind of return to that. Remember, they're humans, and remember that human element that is essential to this process.
Yeah, and also for me, what stood out in that is, again, always remembering we're trying to understand the contextual part of a number, right? You see a score or a comment, trying to understand the contextual aspect of that. So what other data that you might need to look at or refer to kind of get a bigger picture to make a better sense of that number or score or comment or that kind of thing. So I like that.
All right, thank you so much to NCTIES for having us, and for all the participants for coming to our session and sharing their insightful thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah, and thank you as well to Jamaal Wellman at Rolesville Middle School for the music. And thank you to the listeners for supporting this podcast. If you have any thoughts, you want to see any further notes, to leave us some questions, you can do so at www.wcpss.net/datalit, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.